The word prototype tends to get thrown around. Ron Mercer fit that description.
Mercer, hello, yes sir. Mercer spinning and delivering. Gives it to Mercer. Oh, a big finish for Ron Mercer.
Size, skill, athleticism, he had it all. The type of high school recruit that doesn't come around often.
6'7", 205 pounds, originally from Nashville.
This guy's got a terrific physique. Look at the basketball in the net on the left shoulder there. A lot of people think he is the best in the country.
He burst onto the scene at Kentucky, playing the hero in the 1996 National Championship.
Three-pointer, 20 points for the freshman.
He's putting the spin on how good a player he is what he's doing.
After that, he was one of the best players in college basketball.
And the guy that's going to lead them is Ron Mercer. What he is a mismatch problem for the defense. He takes a big guy outside to score or beats him off the dribble. Inside, he will post up smaller players and just jump right over. Mercer, doubled, tripled, doesn't seem to matter. Right on cue, he is special, and the Big Blue faithful know it.
He left school early, a lottery pick to the Boston Celtics, reunited with his former teammates and his coach. His career started well, an exciting young player. The breakthrough seemed imminent.
Here we're going to see the kind of thing that only the gifted can do. Mercer in the open court, reverse spin dribble, fade away, soft shot, put it away.
Tough shot by Mercer.
Ron Mercer obviously was born to be a Celtic.
But that next step never came. He could score, but not in all the ways he needed to.
And he's not a deep-range jump shooter, but he's a very effective mid-range jump shooter.
No team stuck with him for more than a couple of years.
5 teams in 6 years.
You start wondering about a guy who's always been traded constantly.
Ron Mercer was supposed to be a star, so why was he left to wander the NBA landscape?
I just try to go out and play, and whatever happens, happens.
Let's jog your memory. A Nashville native, when it came to high school prospects, it didn't get much better than Ron Mercer. His high school career began at Goodpasture Christian School, and it began early.
And it sounds kind of crazy, but I did not want to play middle school basketball. So I met this guy named Drew Maddox, who went to a private school that was kindergarten through 12. So if I transferred to that school in the 8th grade, I could play varsity. So that's what I did because I wanted more competition. So I went to this school called Goodpasture from 8th through my junior year.
So Ron Mercer wanted competition. It wasn't long, however, until the competition faded away. Mercer was a standout for Goodpasture, looked at as potentially the best player to ever come out of Tennessee. As a sophomore in 1993, he averaged 22 and 10 and was named Mr. Basketball. His junior year would start late, due to Mercer serving a 7-game suspension for violating a state athletic association rule by participating in and accepting merchandise at a Nike All-Star game. Yet even with his shortened season, Mercer averaged 27 and 7, repeated as the best player in the state, and was named a Parade All-American. Ron Mercer was a hot commodity. College recruiters all over the country had been coming out to see the high school star. But again, Mercer wanted a challenge, so another switch was coming.
So my senior year, I wanted more competition. I always wanted to play against the best. And that school would provide that. So I transferred schools my senior year just so I can play better competition.
Ron Mercer would be suiting up for basketball powerhouse Oak Hill Academy. The better competition was no problem for Mercer. The soon-to-be McDonald's All-American averaged 26 and 6 while being named the Naismith Prep Player of the Year, considered by many to be the top player in the 95 class.
A lot of people think he is the best in the country.
He is a complete player. 6'7", 205, but once again, he's another one of those guys that looks bigger than 205.
A class which included heavy hitters like Stephon Marbury, Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, and Vince Carter. So everyone wanted Ron Mercer, yet he had narrowed his college choices down to 2, his hometown Tennessee and the storied University of Kentucky Wildcats. In the end, Mercer again followed the competition.
It came down to 2 schools, University of Tennessee and Kentucky. The University of Tennessee, my whole family's been UT ever since I was younger. Whole family, that's what they represent. I was a big Allen Houston fan. My competitive spirit of me wanting to get better every day, play against the best competition, and Kentucky had that. And that played a big part of me going to Kentucky because, once again, I wanted to play with the best and against the best every day.
The most competition Mercer would probably face would come in practice. Kentucky was stacked from top to bottom. An NBA-bound trio of forward Walter McCarty, reliable guard Tony Delk, and the best of the bunch, Antoine Walker. And then there were the additions to the team.
But what about Ron Mercer, the freshman phenom out of Nashville, Mark? I tell you, I've seen a lot of young players, but this young man has more maturity at this age. I've never seen a kid that will just let the game come to him.
It didn't stop at Mercer. The Wildcats were also welcoming junior transfer Derek Anderson. He and Mercer developed an immediate chemistry, and the top high school recruit began as a starter for Kentucky. The Wildcats would fall to UMass in just their second game of the year, but as most know, after that, the Wildcats were untouchable. Mercer was giving the team some respectable offense, but wasn't a focal point. His early season production often punctuated with big jams. Kentucky was cruising the regular season path like there was nothing in the way. Head coach Rick Pitino had been doing lineup shuffles most of the season, but about halfway through the year, those starting lineups no longer included Mercer.
Man, that was tough. Actually, for me, being a young guy at the time, it was tough. It was disappointing because, you know, you started those games and then all of a sudden now you have to take a step back. And I can remember coach telling me like, hey, Ron, listen, you're better coming off the bench. I want you going against some of those other guys coming off the bench.
But if Mercer wanted competition, that's what he was getting. Mercer himself would say he didn't want the pressure of being a star just yet. He wanted to take his time and learn so that when the test of being a star came, he would be prepared. So he earned his minutes off the bench. His speed and athleticism in the full court was perfect for Kentucky's run and gun style. His numbers weren't big time, but he was exactly what Pitino was expecting. Just a young guy who wanted to get better. His time would come eventually. The Wildcats ran up the score like they ran up the floor. Most games were laughable. Kentucky steamrolled the SEC and finished the regular season on a 25-game win streak. They kept that going through the conference tourney. By the championship game versus Mississippi State, the streak had reached 27. Then came the unthinkable. Kentucky was outplayed, held to one of their lowest point totals of the season. Mercer got a couple shots to fall, but it made no difference. The Bulldogs were the champions of the SEC. The Wildcats were stunned, but they shifted their focus to the real prize, a national championship. Throughout the early tournament games, Mercer wasn't a huge factor. A dominating second half from Kentucky led to an easy first-round win over San Jose State. In the second round versus Virginia Tech, Mercer got the fans out of their seat. Only 8 points, but he was a valuable spark in another win. The next two versus Utah and Wake Forest saw Mercer get little action, but Kentucky kept winning, and winning by a lot, winning each of their first 4 games by at least 20 points. The Final Four brought UMass, the only team to beat Kentucky in the regular season. It was their closest game of the tourney, but the Wildcats would hold off Marcus Camby and the Minutemen, now just 1 win away from a national championship. The final test was Syracuse, and Mercer's time had finally come.
Stolen ahead to Mercer. Hill won't get to it. Pass. Yeah, Mercer over the Mercer left alone. Oh, underneath, puts the spin on it.
He's putting the spin on how good a player he is what he's doing.
Mercer from the corner, three-pointer, 20 points for the freshman.
On the country's biggest stage, Mercer dropped a season-high 20 points. 11 of those came in the first half, helping Kentucky to a lead that they would not relinquish.
I kind of figured he would have a big game because he talked to me earlier. He was like, I'm ready to play. He's never told me that before.
The Wildcats were national champions, and Mercer was a big reason for that.
I was thinking of a nickname. And when you go undefeated for the first time in 41 years and take all the pressure from everything around you and still win the championship, you got to be nicknamed the Untouchables, because nobody could touch it.
The freshman wrapping up his year with averages of about 8 points, 3 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. Kentucky was the team to beat, but they'd look a lot different in '97. Antoine Walker, Tony Delk, and Walter McCarty were all NBA bound. Out of all the remaining players, Ron Mercer had the highest expectations. There was no way he wouldn't be one of the best in the nation, but he wasn't alone. Kentucky did still have Derek Anderson, and he and Mercer planned to rain on opponents in '97.
First of all, with Kentucky, we got a dynamic 1-2 punch in Anderson and also Mr. Mercer, the best 1-2 punch in America. You know, Brad, you mentioned a little bit earlier, as we look at the numbers, I call them thunder and lightning. Thunder for Mercer and lightning for Anderson. I'll tell you, they're going to put a hurt on a lot of people, thunder and lightning.
Everything was going to plan for Kentucky to start the season. They were just fine without their top dogs from last year because their Thunder and Lightning duo were dominating, each averaging about 20 a game, and the wins were flowing. A championship repeat seemed very possible until late January, when Anderson was lost for the season. It was a huge blow to the Wildcats offense, and a huge blow to Mercer. He and Anderson had great chemistry, and not having DA on the other wing was going to be strange. But now it was up to Mercer to lead the Cats. Defenses keyed in on him, yet few found a way to stop him. The whole season was a continuation from last year's championship. Ron Mercer had become one of the best players in the country. He led the SEC in scoring, and even after losing their best player, Kentucky barely skipped a beat. They finished the regular season at 27-4. They were 13-3 in conference play, yet finished second to South Carolina. However, in the SEC tournament, they finished first, running through all three opponents, including defeating Georgia in the championship via blowout. Earlier in the year, scouts had already been talking about Mercer as a potential top 3 pick in the upcoming draft. The rumblings continued to get louder, and his response when Anderson went down only helped his case. A specific performance against blue-chip prospect Tim Thomas and Villanova really solidified Mercer's spot at the top of the draft. Mercer was named SEC Player of the Year and a first-team All-American. Then prior to senior night, the sophomore made his decision. Ron Mercer was heading to the NBA, but Kentucky still had business to take care of. They began their title defense, yet how far would they go with only half of their star duo? Kentucky took care of Montana in round 1, then had a closer than expected win over Iowa in round 2 after Mercer struggled. He got back on track in the Sweet 16 versus St. Joe's, finishing with 19 points. Then against Utah in the Elite 8, Mercer took over in the first half. The swingman would finish with 21 points to lead the Wildcats over the Utes. Kentucky was heading back to the Final Four, this year taking on Minnesota. And it was another tough out for the Wildcats. Mercer had 19 points, yet only shot about 33%. Luckily, Kentucky would hold on for another victory. Yet there was cause for concern. As the tournament progressed, the wins were getting less convincing. So would they have one more in them against Arizona? Mercer would have one of his worst offensive showings of the tourney, as Arizona focused on stopping him. But he'd pull down some rebounds and dish some assists, and when regulation ended, the game still hadn't been decided. Yet in the extra frame, Mercer fouled out, and Arizona pulled away. No repeat for Kentucky, as Mercer finished his year with averages of about 18 points, 5.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. So Ron Mercer was heading to the NBA draft, all but locked in as a top 10 pick. However, he wasn't a perfect player, and there were some who had felt that he should have stayed and that he had a lot more to learn.
Well, this is a learning process for him, and if he doesn't develop a feel for the half-court game, games like this will expose that weakness. He's much better off sticking around for a while and learning this basketball.
But potential goes a long way, and Ron Mercer had plenty of that.
Pick in the 1997 NBA draft, the Boston Celtics select Ron Mercer from the University of Kentucky.
Ron Mercer was a Boston Celtic. He'd be joining his Kentucky teammate, who Boston had drafted a year earlier in Antoine Walker. But the bigger story is who his coach would be. About 6 weeks before the draft, Boston had hired Rick Pitino, so he continued filling out the Celtics with Wildcats. Mercer was surprised, but he was happy.
I talked to you a couple weeks ago in Chicago. You said you wanted to play for Coach Pitino in Boston, but everybody said for the past couple weeks he wasn't going to take you. When did you find out? What were your conversations with Coach?
I was just hoping that he would take me. I never knew what was going to happen. I figured that he wouldn't really pass me up, so I think all the talk kind of scared everybody off, and I ended up where I really wanted to be anyway.
Yet there was a lot of work to do for a Boston team coming off their worst season in history. The Celtics had also selected Chauncey Billups 3 picks before Mercer, so it looked like a successful draft. But it wasn't enough blue. So just days before the season started, Boston became even more untouchable when Pitino traded to acquire Walter McCarty. And on opening night, Boston featured 3 of the national championship winning Wildcats in their starting lineup.
Go to sleep in the backcourt. Ron Mercer hits the first basket in the Rick Pitino era.
In that game, those 3 players were responsible for 48 of Boston's 90 shot attempts. It would be a sign of things to come. Pitino went with the guys he knew, and tried to bring their run-and-gun style to the NBA. The Celtics played at one of the league's fastest paces and put up a lot of shots, as the Kentucky trio combined to attempt more than half of Boston's shots all season. But out of the three, Mercer was the most efficient. His slashing and athleticism got him a lot of high percentage looks at the hoop. He used screens well and showed a very polished mid-range jumper. Unfortunately, not one which extended beyond the arc. And while he was effective in Pitino's fast-paced full-court style, his effectiveness in the half-court was proving to be a weakness.
If Indiana can force Ron Mercer to put that ball on the floor, his shooting percentage dropped dramatically.
Nevertheless, Mercer was having a great rookie year. If he was ever overwhelmed, he didn't show it. He would act as Boston's second leading scorer behind Walker and was named a first-team all-rookie member. Boston was improved from last season, but they were still far from the Celtics standard. With the team still in the playoff picture, the Celtics tried to make a splash, sending a package including Billups to the Raptors for guard Kenny Anderson, who would only appear in 16 games after the trade, and the Celtics went downhill. They already had one of the lowest shooting percentages in the league, and now without a consistent point guard, they continued their struggles, going 12-17 the rest of the way, finishing at 36-46, and missing out on the postseason, as Mercer ended his rookie year with averages of about 15.5 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 2 assists per game. Ron Mercer had been a great offensive player for a rookie, but Pitino wanted more from him. He wanted Mercer to impact the game in many ways, more like his teammate and defensive stopper Bruce Bowen. And going into '99, Mercer would have to be at the top of his game. He now had a lot more competition. During the draft, Boston had taken another highly touted swingman in Paul Pierce. Going into the lockout-shortened season, Mercer had kept himself in shape, and early indications were that Mercer was set to take that next step. But then he sprained his knee. It would keep him out of some early games, yet he was putting up some big-time scoring numbers when he returned. The Celtics continued playing fast, and Mercer continued taking a lot of shots. He was definitely playing more assertive, but he still had to concede shots to Walker, and as the season played out, Pierce was quickly looking like the future. Mercer had even said during the preseason that Pierce was well ahead of where he was at that point last year. But for now, Mercer was again second on the team in scoring, behind only Walker. He had upped almost all of his numbers. He still lacked a reliable three-point shot, but he was working and improving.
Mercer's worked a lot on that outside shot in college, primarily a guy who took it to the basket, now trying to extend his range.
And he's not a deep-range jump shooter, but he's a very effective mid-range jump shooter.
From a talent perspective, the Celtics were rich. They had 3 dynamic offensive players still years away from their prime, but they weren't known for defense, and neither were the Celtics as a whole. The losses piled up, and in a 50-game season, the Celtics weren't able to reach 20 wins. It was yet another year without Boston in the playoffs, as Mercer finished with averages of about 17 points, 4 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. So now Ron Mercer was 2 years into his NBA career. There was no doubt he could score the ball, but what else could he do? He had also played 2 years in the same offense as he had at Kentucky, a Rick Pitino offense that never really pushed him to develop an outside shot. He was built like the perfect shooting guard, yet he couldn't shoot the three-pointer. But still, he was young and early into his career. He could very well become that perfect shooting guard. Now it came the issue of paying him. They had just paid Walker. They also knew they'd eventually have to pay Pierce. Mercer felt he was valuable. The Celtics didn't seem to agree that he was as valuable as he thought. Boston had to make a choice. So in August, they chose a future without Ron Mercer. Mercer was sent to the Denver Nuggets, a winning situation no better than he had been in Boston, but at least somewhere he could breathe a sigh of relief after finally getting away from the Boston rumor mill. Much like the Celtics, the Nuggets were also a lot of offense with little defense, as Mercer joined guys like Nick Van Exel and Antonio McDyess. Mercer slotted into the starting lineup and continued to do his usual damage in the points column. His efficiency had improved slightly from last year, and it was largely due to an improved three-point shot. He wasn't taking many, but they were falling. On top of that, Mercer had been publicly criticized by teammates for shooting too much. Eventually he listened, and his rebounding and assist numbers jumped to some of the highest of his career. Ron Mercer was playing his best basketball. All Denver saw was a growing price tag on the upcoming free agent. so to avoid losing him for nothing, they sent Mercer to his third team in less than a year. Mercer was joining an Orlando team led by first-year head coach Doc Rivers. Orlando wouldn't be challenging for a title, but Rivers was coaching them to a surprisingly good season. They lacked a go-to scorer and would try their hand with Mercer, but he had lingering injuries over the remainder of the season. His numbers dropped, his shots didn't fall, and the 41-41 Magic would narrowly miss the playoffs. As Mercer's overall year ended with averages of about 17 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. Mercer was open to a long-term deal with Orlando, but Orlando were after bigger fish, and they needed as much cap space as possible. Orlando tried to find a sign-and-trade deal, but Mercer found a better deal on his own, signing a lucrative 4-year, $27 million contract with Chicago, largely because Chicago didn't want to end free agency empty-handed.
Mercer really the lone big-name free agent that the Bulls were able to sign. So much made about how much they were under the salary cap, and they had so much to spend, but the big-name free agents like Tracy McGrady all said no, did not want to go to Chicago. They wound up signing Mercer 4 years, $27 million.
Ron Mercer had always gone towards the competition, and he wanted the challenge of being a key piece in the rebuilding of the post-Jordan Bulls. So Mercer was already on the 4th team of his career. He was responsible for part of that, and part of it was out of his control.
And one of the raps on him, when I say about wondering, is that he tends to shoot a lot, perhaps a little too much, be a bit unselfish, or being a bit selfish, I should say.
But the other reason he was traded was because they knew he was a free agent, and Orlando didn't want to pay that salary, nor did Denver, nor the Celtics. That's originally why they traded him too.
But maybe Chicago would be the place to call home. The Bulls weren't established, but they had something brewing. Mercer was a young player added to a young core, which included the forward tandem of Elton Brand and Ron Artest, and these three would act as the majority of the offense. An offense that operated at a much slower pace than Mercer had been playing in his whole career, so he was forced to adjust and operate in more half-court sets. He was taking guys off the dribble more than ever, using his quick first step to get to the hoop, and his ability to come off screens and hit the mid-range shot was a valuable asset. Mercer was the team's second leading scorer, but put up a career-high average. His rebounds were also a career high, and it would be the only season of his career averaging at least 3 assists per game. So statistically, this was the best Ron Mercer would ever be. A late January game versus Portland would even see him go for a career-high 39 points, but it was a loss. One of many on the year. Mercer had spent his whole career playing on above-average offenses. The Bulls' offense was dead last. Their defense wasn't much better. So while the numbers looked nice, there wasn't much substance to go with them. And Mercer missing a lot of the second half of the season due to ankle tendonitis didn't help anything. Chicago finished with 15 wins and their worst winning percentage in franchise history. And Mercer finished his first year as a Bull with averages of about 19.5 points, 4 rebounds, and 3.5 assists per game. Going into 2002, the Bulls were still building something, but it wasn't the same thing from last year. Elton Brand had been traded to the Clippers. Now Jerry Krause was putting his faith in 2 fresh out of high school big men. But Chicago still had Mercer. They liked what they saw from him, specifically in his leadership. They felt he was shedding his selfish label. His teammates saw the same changes, with the always reserved Mercer even acting as a mentor to a rookie Jamal Crawford the year prior. And Chicago still had Artest. And they had a young Brad Miller, who had been slowed down by injury last year. But for Mercer, things were a bit harder. Last season, teams had to respect Brand. Oftentimes, they converged on him. It gave Mercer easier paths and more open looks, but that was no more. So while Mercer was acting as the team's leading scorer over the first half of the year, he was making less than 40% of his shots. Obviously, he had his moments and made some big plays, but the most famous highlight of Ron Mercer would come at his own expense.
Oakley to Mercer. Mercer on the run.
What a play! What a defensive play! A two-hand block steal!
Yet nothing was going right in Chicago. They got off to another horrible start, and by the trade deadline, they were onto their 3rd coach of the year. Chicago wanted more veteran leadership. They struck a deal with Indiana and traded their 3 best players to the Pacers. So Mercer was packaged along with Miller and Artest. Indiana didn't have a need for a shooting guard just yet, as they still featured Reggie Miller. but he was in the twilight of his career. Maybe Mercer could fill those shoes when Miller decided to hang them up. But as it was, Mercer saw his minutes cut dramatically by head coach Isaiah Thomas and would deal with knee and back injuries, limiting him to just 13 underwhelming appearances for Indiana. But the Pacers would, however, finish at 42-40. It got them the East final playoff spot, so at least Ron Mercer was finally getting to experience the postseason. Over the first 2 games, Mercer hadn't done much. By game 3, he started getting decent minutes, surprisingly at point guard, as an attempt to slow down Jason Kidd with his size. Mercer responded well and upped his play the rest of the way. Then in the series-deciding game 5, Mercer would leave it all on the court. He scored 20 points off the bench, at one point dropping 8 straight. The Pacers forced overtime. Mercer had 4 in the extra period. A second overtime was needed. Mercer scored Indiana's first bucket, yet also their last. The Pacers went cold, and New Jersey ran away with it. Mercer's year ended with him averaging about 14 points, 3.5 rebounds, and 2.5 assists per game. Mercer's end-of-season numbers were a little misleading, mostly inflated by his time in Chicago. Now a full and hopefully healthy season in Indiana would really show how much Isaiah Thomas intended to use him. Mercer was ready and willing to do whatever was asked of him to help the team, but he still didn't get much more play than last year. At this point, Mercer was a guy who could score, just not consistently. His three-point shot had never developed, and now he was barely venturing beyond the arc. And without being a lockdown defender or great distributor, Mercer's game-to-game value was quite dependent on if his shot was falling. And by the end of the season, he had even fallen out of the rotation. But Indiana was on the up. This season they totaled 48 wins, and the first round brought Mercer's first team. Ron Mercer was barely used over the first 2 games, but from games 3 through 5, Thomas would give him huge minutes, and Mercer dropped at least 12 points in each game, even going for 13, 6, 3, and 4 steals in a Game 5 win to stave off elimination. But the magic wore off in Game 6, and the Celtics won in a blowout. Mercer's season ended with him averaging about 7.5 points, 2 rebounds, and 1.5 assists per game. The offseason would see Mercer switch teams again, included in a 3-team deal where Mercer ended up with the defending champion Spurs. Potentially a great situation for him to be some instant offense on a championship caliber team, but he didn't even make it through the whole season. Mercer received limited minutes over the first few months of the year. He wasn't doing what Greg Popovich wanted, and Pop told him. Mercer respected and appreciated that someone was finally being straight up with him. But come late February, the Spurs were very blunt, releasing Mercer after 39 games, which had seen him average about 5 points, 1.5 rebounds, and half an assist per game. Mercer signed on with the Nets for the 05 season. He would actually begin the season as a starter, expected to replace Kerry Kittles. But after 3 games, knee surgery would sideline him for 3 months. When he returned, his spot had been filled, with New Jersey having acquired Vince Carter. So Mercer played a bench role over the next month. Not too consistent, but every once in a while, he'd have a mini scoring explosion. Yet in early March, he went down again. This time, he was out for the rest of the year and would watch from the sideline as Miami knocked off New Jersey in the first round of the playoffs, ending his injury-filled season with averages of about 7.5 points, 3 rebounds, and 1 assist per game. The Nets wanted to avoid the luxury tax, so they cut ties with Mercer after the season. Mercer's body had been failing him over the past few years, and teams weren't showing much interest. It was unceremonious, but at 29 years old, his NBA career was over. Ron Mercer was a guy who seemed destined to be a star. He had all the tools, but maybe his physical gifts and elite natural talent held him back from expanding his repertoire. Then there was the situations. Playing under Pitino in Boston didn't put urgency on Mercer improving his game. His next couple stops also pushed the pace. It helped mask his lack of an outside shot, but eventually it caught up with him, and his inefficiency hurt him. But it also didn't really matter where he went. He seemed to be more of a placeholder until something better came along, never being a part of any team's long-term plans. He didn't agree with it, but he took it in stride and accepted the business of the NBA. And in the end, Ron Mercer is a national champion, a Kentucky legend, and had a better NBA career than most. But that's it for today's episode on Ron Mercer. Hope you enjoyed it, and make sure to subscribe for more videos like this one. If you liked it, check out these two on a couple of his untouchable teammates. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.